people at work every day, everywhere we go. There are people working in many different jobs, filling a variety of roles in life and society. As Christians, we may rightly wonder what these jobs and roles have to do with faith. Does our daily work have much, if anything, to do with serving God? And if it does, what's the connection? Does my work matter to God? How can I serve God as a truck driver? How can I serve God as a teacher? Does my work have value? Is it just about a paycheck? What do I have to offer now that I'm retired? Does what I do count? Although these are essential questions, often they are not very clearly addressed in the church. For some of us, it might seem like what we spend so much of Monday through Saturday doing becomes almost invisible when we enter church on Sunday. Does Sunday morning have anything to do with my work week? I wonder if anyone understands what my Monday mornings look like. Most weeks, this is the only time I get to worship. I wonder if the Bible has anything to say about the work I do during the rest of my week. These are great questions. They are, in truth, theological questions. So does the church have any answers for these very important questions? The Bible actually does affirm that our work matters to God, that what we do day in and day out can be understood as godly work. We see a beautiful and compelling picture of this by looking at the beginning and end of the biblical storyline. In the first book of the Bible, Genesis, in the very first chapter, we hear that God has created human beings in God's own image. This divine image includes the human work of attending to and overseeing God's world. In Genesis 2, this human work is pictured as caring for the garden where God has placed the human beings God has made. And this garden needs people to farm the fertile land. God's creation requires human oversight for its flourishing. Humanity is envisioned as joining in God's creative work in this world. Even before the invasion of sin into the world in Genesis 3, work is part of God's intention for humanity. Work becomes difficult and, at times, painful after the fall. Yet, work itself, creation care, production, and creativity, participates in the original goodness of God's creation. Now, let's jump to the conclusion of the biblical storyline, to the very last chapters of Scripture. The book of Revelation concludes with a picture of human flourishing that resonates with Genesis 1 and 2. The New Jerusalem envisioned in Revelation 21 through 22 is a place where humanity thrives as God dwells with them. What is similar between that first garden and the final city? Like the first garden, a river runs through the holy city, and the tree of life also reappears. The differences between Eden and the New Jerusalem are also important. Revelation affirms no longer will there be any curse. This language points back to the curse from Genesis 3. And while human beings are barred from the first garden to keep them from eating the tree of life, the gates of the New Jerusalem are flung open wide, never to be closed again. Life and light will pervade in that new place. Yet, that new reality is not called Eden or a garden. It is called the New Jerusalem and the Holy City. Understanding this difference is vital and helps us hear why our work matters to God. Humanity has changed its address from the beginning to the end of the story. In that final day, their address is no longer a garden, but a city. And this change of address is important theologically. For what happens when humans faithfully work the primitive landscape of a garden throughout history? The complexity of the city is a natural outcome. And envisioning the final destination of humanity as a city, now perfected in God, affirms the great variety of human vocations we see in our present world. If this theological picture shows that work is important for the final state of humanity, then our work here and now contributes to God's purposes. Knowing our destination in a renewed creation can give us a greater sense of purpose in what we do in the present. Work that contributes to human flourishing is at its core service to God, whether that work is creative, productive, or restorative. There is no great divide between sacred work and secular work. The promise of God's renewal of the entire creation means that all work can be sacred because work of all kinds will have a lasting impact. So here's what we've seen from a biblical perspective. Human vocation and purpose involved caring for God's world. Human flourishing is envisioned across Scripture from primordial garden to perfected city. This biblical storyline invites us to reflect on how what we do with the majority of our waking hours fits with God's purposes. And church is a great place to discuss this question with others. As we do, all sorts of people might find the deeper connection between their work and their faith. If final human flourishing looks as much like Monday through Friday as Sunday morning, then what we do in our careers, our work, our vocations truly matters.